Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Wallmeyer, and I am the local history librarian here at Johnson County Library. Thank you for attending today's program, The Past Is Prologue, Black Oscars. The Past Is Prologue is a bi-monthly program offered by Johnson County Library, where we highlight topics that are often left out, glossed over, or misrepresented in our history books. Before we begin, we want to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A engagement tool, and we will try to answer all of these at the end of the program. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available in the next 2 weeks and can be accessed on Johnson County Library's YouTube channel or on our website at jocolibrary.org/events/on-demand. We would like to also begin today with a brief land acknowledgement. Our Johnson County Library locations stand on the ancestral and treaty lands of Native American peoples, including the Kansa, Kaskaskia, Kickapoo, Osage, Peoria, Sioux, and Shawnee. We pay respects to all Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, for the continuing presence in this land and the land where you may be joining us from tonight. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Frederick Gooding, Jr.
Awesome. All righty. Well, welcome everyone. I appreciate you all taking the time to tune in and talk about a very interesting topic. And I'm very thankful to the Johnson County Library System for creating a space and place where we can talk about matters that are important to us. So thank you, Amanda, for that rousing introduction. And without any further ado, let's get this show on the road. So, as you all heard, my name is Dr. Frederick Gooding, Jr., but you can call me Dr. G. And I'm the author of Black Oscars, From Mammy to Minny, What the Academy Awards Tell Us About African Americans. I know that subtitle is a mouthful, but I will explain. So, I just want to start off from the very beginning with a little disclaimer by stating that I think one of the reasons why we're here is because everyone loves the movie, including me, right? Okay. So, even though I have critiques about Hollywood, it's very clear that this is all coming from a place of love. In fact, what we're going to do is, because I love the movie so much, we're going to follow the traditional 3-act structure that many movies observe in terms of an introduction, conflict and climax, and then a resolution. So one more time, I would not be able to provide the analysis and the thoughts that you're going to hear if I did not love the movies. I do not have an axe to grind with Hollywood. But at the same time, with many things that we love, it's because we love them that we have oftentimes feedback. And I have some feedback when it comes to race and how it is portrayed in Hollywood. And one way to study this is through Academy Awards. So, speaking of Academy Award winning roles, we have Denzel Washington in Training Day, and I thought it would be appropriate to set the tone for our training moment, if you would.
I like that shit.
I think we all know what happens. But speaking of knowing what happens, I do also want to issue a spoiler. Do be mindful that for many of the movies I'm going to talk about, that I'm going to assume that many of us are familiar, and in order to simply facilitate the analysis, I will reveal many key plot points about movies. And so if I'm speaking about a movie that you have not seen before, simply cover up your ears and you should be good from there. So let's circle back to that long subtitle, if we would. Remember, the name of the book is Black Oscars, From Mammy to Minny, comma, What the Academy Awards Tell Us About African Americans. So, from Mammy to Minny, what the Academy Awards tell us about African Americans. So let's start with, who is Mammy? Do many of us know who the Mammy figure actually is? Mammy is not a term used as frequently today, right, in 2024. But it was a term that was popularized in the turn of the century, stemming back to the antebellum period. So Mammy was a term usually reserved for African-American women who were typically in a servile, subservient position. Mammy also is the name of the first Academy Award that went to a non-white individual back in what year? 1939 for the movie Gone with the Wind. So here you have in front of you Hattie McDaniel. She's now been recognized on postage stamps, etc. But she was the first non-white actor or actress, right? Actor of any gender, first non-white person to win an Academy Award in 1939. So again, the subtitles from Mammy to Minny, what the Academy Awards tell us. So that's Mammy. Obviously, she's historically significant, being the first actress to win. And we'll talk a little bit about her role and what that meant at that time and even now. But who is Minny, right? Who is Minny? Does anybody know who Minny is? Well, believe it or not, the symmetry is profound. Minny is also the name of an Academy Award-winning character played by an African-American female, Octavia Spencer, in the 2011 movie, The Help. So let's review one more time. From Mammy, meaning an Academy Award-winning role for a Black woman playing a maid, right? Or even maid might be generous, seeing how she was on the plantation, right? Called Tara in Gone with the Wind. And then some 7 decades later, we're still handing out Academy Awards to Black women portraying maids on screen. So what we want to dialogue and engage is, what do the Academy Awards tell us about African Americans? Because Academy Awards, which are going to be televised internationally this weekend, are quite significant indeed. Now, whether you stay up and watch the whole 3-hour affair, that's one thing, but realize that millions of eyes are watching worldwide. And in fact, the Academy Awards are only the second most watched televised program in the whole planet Earth, only behind, you guessed it, the Super Bowl. So you're talking about a very significant event where people will, corporations will charge some $3 to $5 million for 30-second slots because so many eyes are watching, right? So it's not to say that the Academy Awards are dispositive of necessarily the best. There's always controversy over the best picture or who is the best actor or actress in any particular year. But what we do know is that many eyes are watching the Academy Awards. If an individual receives a nomination or if a film receives a nomination, oftentimes there's a term called Oscar bounce, where they will benefit financially for the remainder of their career or the life of the movie. And it's a stamp of approval that it has been vetted, that the individual has been vetted, and they are now within this austere pantheon. After all, there's only so many Oscars to hand out every year, so to become a winner is a significant, prestigious event indeed. And so the thinking is, by taking a look through the Academy Awards, not just the actors themselves and where they were born and raised, but looking at the roles specifically that were nominated and the ones that won, the question is, what does this reveal about the relationship that African Americans have with respect to their value and visibility off screen? So that's what we mean by, what do the Academy Awards tell us about African Americans? All righty. So in order to help out with our analysis, I have created 5 Oscar angles, right? And so what they are recurring character patterns that allow us to be more consistent with our analysis of what it is that we're seeing on screen. And believe it or not, the 5 Oscar angles were inspired by my research when I actually was fortunate to go out to the Academy, the Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Yes, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, when I went to their library out in Los Angeles. I actually had the good fortune of, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, holding an actual Oscar in my hand. Absolutely. I don't have photographic proof only because they ask for you to put away your phones inside of lockers. Otherwise, I would have proof of me holding an Oscar. Believe it or not, they're heavier than what you think, right? So that's a little interesting fun fact. A lot heavier than what you think. But in looking at the Oscar, because normally people hold it up high, I actually was just looking at it and I noticed at the bottom these 5 rings. I asked about it, and it turns out that the 5 rings at the bottom represented the 5 major parts of the industry at that point in time when they first were started in the 1920s. So that gave me the inspiration to maintain some sort of symmetry. And so I came up with these Oscar angles. Black, non-American, crossover, deja vu, gravity of reality, and still in the struggle. I'll return to those in a little bit. So, if you're wondering if you missed anything, you didn't miss much. But when talking about African Americans in movies, it's important that we don't miss out on one other particular ingredient before we get started.
So what did I miss?
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that whenever we talk about the history of African Americans in film, we must necessarily talk about one key ingredient that often this gets left out of conversations, and that would be the factor of racism. After all, when we think about Hollywood's history, does anyone recall the first movie, 1915, the archetype of all mainstream movies? That would be Birth of a Nation, right? D.W. Griffith. And if you watch the movie, it is absolutely groundbreaking in terms of how the movie was put together, the angles, the scenes. And so it has this historical value in that respect from a technical standpoint. But from a content standpoint, it is also racially problematic. You literally have white KKK members, and KKK stands for Ku Klux Klan, riding in on their high horses to save a white damsel in distress from a white male in blackface. If this sounds problematic, it's because it is. Even though it was played in the White House, right? It was called The Flash of White Lightning by Roosevelt. Also, when you think about racism in the history of African Americans on film, does anyone recall the name of the first talking picture? Well, if you guessed 1927, The Jazz Singer, you would be correct. Notice the jazz singer also features a white male, Al Jolson, who dressed up in blackface because he was actually Jewish and his parents wanted him to sing and be a cantor in the synagogue, but he wanted to make it in show business. So we're talking about 2 fundamentally important movies to Hollywood history, and woven, baked into the fabric of these movies is racism when it comes to the African American image, right? So I just want us to remember that this is the tension in the relationship that began from the very beginning. And so when we think about blackface, when we think about people on plantations being subjugated, that for me in so many ways is akin to the old school racism, right? And it's the difference between old school racism and what I've discovered and uncovered to be a new strand of racism that perhaps we can talk a little bit more about through these Oscar angles. And what do I mean? Well, when you compare the 2 trains that you just saw on your screen, right? The first one is a lumbering locomotive. You can hear it from a mile away. You see the energy source, coal burning. You see the smoke, the plume of smoke. The contrast and the differences between this train and the new train are quite profound. The new train is slicker in design, it's sleeker, it's quieter, it's more fuel efficient. And so the question is, when we talk about racism, because we see less of the ugly aspects of racism, the question is, has racism evaporated or has it evolved? Right? And so when we talk about what is happening today, what we don't see are overt, obvious, and offensive instances of racism as much, right? And when I mean instances, meaning when was the last time you saw a noose hanging from the tree, let alone a body decaying inside of it? I mean, this is what Billie Holiday talked about when she sang about strange fruit, right? And this was a horrible time in our country where it really did happen. I mean, people would send postcards on the saying, wish you were here, right? I mean, this really did happen. But again, we don't see much of that. And also when we think about the KKK, even though they reached the zenith of 4 million members in the 1920s during the second resurgence, they exist, but perhaps not as strong in number or influence as from before. So these forms of racism are out. Just to make sure we're on the same page, I still wanted to show an example of a movie clip, an older movie clip from 1934 that plays upon this idea of the older ideas and narratives when it came to seeing African Americans on screen, let alone African American women. Just take a look at this movie called Imitation Life, and it was remade in the 1950s.
Oh, dear, I don't want to get the old man.
Fella nudged the president and said,
Incorporate.
"Why bother about all this? I've gone without my dinner. I barnstormed over here in the snow to tell her she's on Easy Street. And I get just as far as a stranded dogfish on the Barnegat Shoals. Now, you tell her."
Now, look, Delilah. We've made $15,000 in the last 6 months.
We'll double that by July and make 100,000 next year.
So now we want to incorporate.
Yes'm.
You see, that's the best way to run a business.
Yes'm.
Now, here are the papers for you to sign.
But if I sign them, then what?
Then you'll have a 20% interest in the Aunt Delilah Corporation.
You'll be rich.
You'll have your own car, your own house.
My own house? You gonna send me away, Miss B? I can't live with you? Oh, honey child, please don't send me away. Don't do that to me.
Well, don't you want your own house?
No. How am I gonna take care of you and Miss Jessie if I ain't here?
Oh, Delilah. Delilah, you'll have me in tears in a minute.
Let me and Peola stay same as we've been doing. I's your cook and I want to stay your cook.
Well, of course you can stay, Delilah. I only thought now that the money's coming in, and after all, it's all from your pancake flour.
I gives it to you, honey. I makes you a present of it. You's welcome.
Oh, Delilah, you're hopeless.
I could have told you that.
So what's significant about this clip is that it is actually Delilah who's responsible for creating this recipe with pancake flour. And what happens is you see that the two white individuals come up with this idea of selling the pancake flour. And so that's where the numbers were coming in. We made 15,000 by July, we'll make 100,000 next year. So this idea that this is a very lucrative business and everyone's going to be rich. But mind you, let's do the math again. It's Aunt Delilah's pancake flour. These two people, the mistress of the home, I mean, the woman that the Black woman works for, it's her home. And then she has this white male friend, because remember at that time, many women needed, males to be advocates for them in terms of entering into business. And so, because she was a widow with her child, if you saw the movie. And so the idea is that they plan to make all this money and generously plan to give Delilah a 20% stake. Now, for many of us, we might be thinking, well, if it's Delilah's pancake flour recipe, she's the progenitor, if it's her proprietary interest, then perhaps it is she who should be receiving perhaps 80% and they receive 20% for their trouble, right? But even aside from all that, you see how Delilah's countenance, look at her posture, she's bending over, she wants to give away the money, she wants to stay at the home, she doesn't want any compensation for being a person who around the clock is catering to the needs of others. And let's just think about how this might, in so many ways, be entertaining to a majority white audience at that time. how a member of the audience can walk out the theater thinking, wow, race relations perhaps are not that bad after all. When you think about how so many African-American women were limited to domestic positions up until the 1940s. World War II really helped open things up. But for so many African-American women, that was the only type of job that they could find or hold down. And many of these jobs were very, very demanding. And this is before the age of hashtag Me Too, if you know what I'm saying. But that is an example of the films of old. What I'm interested in is what I call racism 2.0. So instead of films that are overt, obvious, and offensive in terms of their messaging, because for many of us in watching that clip, it might be a little awkward. It might be difficult to say I'm going to have fun watching this movie on a Friday night because it's just from a bygone era. But what are we dealing with today? The monster we face today, ladies and gentlemen, is much more subtle, suave, and sophisticated. So in other words, with racism 2.0, part of the problem is that there is no problem. Everything looks good on the surface, okay? That's what's in, and I think when we look at these Black Oscar angles, that is what's going to help us appreciate what is perhaps hidden in plain sight. That's the end of Act 1. All righty. So, Act 2. When you see on screen the posters here for Hidden Figures, Green Book, and The Help, what do all these films have in common? Well, the quick and easy answer is they all have in common Black Academy Award Oscar nominees. So, before I go into detail about the Black Oscar angles, I just thought it'd be interesting to have a little contextual conversation about what I'm talking about. This idea of what appears to be good on the surface might actually be hiding something if we don't know where to look, right? So in other words, there still might be more work for us to do, okay? Which is it's not a bad thing. I mean, our generations before us had to work for a better society, and we still might have to do a little work as well and stay vigilant. And here's some of the reasons why. Why don't we start with our first movie to see how these images play out. And starting with Hidden Figures, we are looking at Octavia Spencer again. You see to the far right, and we have Taraji P. Henson here in the middle. And then I think what's interesting also is, to your left, when we, have, three women, right, hidden figures. And then we have in the middle of the poster, Kevin Costner, right? Now, the reason why that's important is because of the scene that I want to show you. So the movie is about these three women, right? Hidden figures. It's a double entendre on this idea that not only do you have to double check your math to make sure it's accurate when you're trying to presumptively send items off into space, but also that these people, these figures were hidden from view, and their contributions were largely unheralded. And the woman to the far left, by the way, is Janelle Monáe. And the reason I wanted to point her out is because she fits another pattern that I'm going to talk about in a little more detail, which is that many Black Oscar nominees are technically not classically trained actors. And so it's a shortcut for Hollywood to employ people that are well-known, as in well-known comedians or well-known music stars. It's a way for them to hedge their bets and putting out somebody that is well-known without putting in the resources to actually build up an A-list actor over time. So let's take a brief clip, take a look at a brief clip from Hidden Figures, and let's talk about Kevin Costner's role.
No more colored restrooms. No more white restrooms. Just plain old toilets. Go wherever you damn well please. Preferably closer to your desk. Here at NASA, we all pee the same color.
Okay, so in so many ways, this is thumbs up, right? Here at NASA, we all pee the same color. He's taking down the sign that, believe it or not, true story, it did happen, allowed for segregated restrooms. I mean, let's not forget how in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson did allow for segregated workspaces, particularly within the federal government. And if it doesn't make any sense to you, then you're right. It doesn't make any sense that the very institution working for freedom and equality would actually observe racial segregation. Postmaster Alfred Burleson pleaded and impressed upon him the need to keep morale high, particularly for postal workers that were trapped in conditions and trains, having to share the same glasses and sheets with Black workers. So that was the impetus for segregating the federal workforce, okay? So that being said, you actually had signs segregating the restrooms, you know, in the federal workplace, and Kevin Costner rips down the sign and saying, no more of this. This is actually getting in the way of us getting our jobs done. Great scene. Only problem is, it's made up. So I think this raises a lot of questions, at least for me, right? If we're talking about a movie about 3 African-American women and the name is a double entendre referencing how their actions have been overlooked or underappreciated, why is it necessary to create a scene whereby a white male is perhaps made to look more heroic than what he was? Now, again, if it's a true story, that's great. But the idea that it is fictionally created and fabricated, I think raises questions as to whether the movie makers saw the 3 Black women as strong enough a platform by which they could attract people into the movie theater space. So the fact that is still Academy Award nomination, right? You know, in terms of Taraji P. Henson, we still have to ask ourselves about the quality of this representation. Are African Americans still the stars of their own movies, right? I think it's just a fascinating question when we talk about, you know, are African American directors making movies about aspects of the white experience and then just injecting scenes? I'm not sure. But in this scenario, we do have Theodore Melfi, who he created the scene to, I guess, add to the movie from his artistic point of view. But that also raises the other question about why so many African-American movies are based upon what we call pararealistic stories. So even when you look at Domingo's nomination this year for Rustin, that fulfills this pattern whereby the movie is based upon a real life event. Think about Jennifer Hudson in Dreamgirls. Think about you know, the Judas of the Black Messiah. These are movies, or Ali, right? These are movies that are based upon extraordinary people in real life, and which is fine, but at the same time, it still shows Hollywood's limited viewpoint with respect to not having African Americans in scripts that are just created fully from fantasy. Speaking about Octavia Spencer, let's look at the movie The Help for a little bit, because this movie was significant in that it was based upon a New York Times bestselling novel by Catherine Stockett. And similar to Hidden Figures, I think an important question for us to ask is, who does The Help help? Who is this movie actually really about? Is it about the 2 African-American women who are seen standing in the poster? Or is it about Skeeter, as played by Emma Stone, featured in the center of your screen. Let me just play a brief clip.
You is kind, you is smart, you is important, you is smart, you is kind, you is important. Oh, that's so good.
And so I think one question to ask is, to what degree does a movie like this depart significantly from a movie like this, right? Whereby an African-American woman is still seen in a subjugated position on the big screen, right? I mean, just given the recent Screen Actors Guild strike, the Writers Guild of America strike, we're talking about individuals who are supremely talented and creative, and still this is the only way in which we can imagine African Americans is when they're on screen in maid outfits, right? And I think even more so, which is perhaps concerning, is when you think about the real help. Catherine Stockett observed the help in her brother's house in terms of getting the inspiration for the story. At the very least, Delilah was able to obtain 20% from the movie Imitation of Life. But in real life, the question is, how much did the brothers help get from the story, right? And similar scenario happened with The Blind Side, which is also Academy Award winning movie, whereby Michael Orr felt that his representation was not accurate and he was not compensated at the same level that the Tubies were, right? So, another issue there about whose story is this, right? And I think that in looking at the help, we also have to ask other questions about agency, right? Octavia Spencer wins an Academy Award for her role. And I think one of the signature scenes was when she created a pie, again, spoiler alert, called The Terrible Awful, that she served to the woman that she used to work for. So I think for the juvenile humor inside of all of us still, I guess that's funny in some way, right? I guess. But at the same time, in thinking about it, I just don't know how funny it really is when you think about how African-American women truly were subjugated and did have to play these roles and really did have to come up with creative and ingenuitive ways to resist and change their conditions for the better. And so if what you're saying is that the only way that you could protest against inhospitable working conditions or unfair treatment or just flat out disrespect is by taking your own fecal matter, mixing it with the butter and the sugar, putting it in your own oven. I don't want to get into the weeds about, does she throw away the utensils she used when she's done with them? I mean, do you wash them? I'm not sure, but the idea is that if that's the only way in which these African-American women could express themselves, I don't know if it does a service to real African-American women that I know in my life that have gone about matters in a different way, right? And again, we're talking about a movie that wasn't told from an African-American female perspective, right? I mean, this is sold to African-Americans, right? And so I think even more interesting is that if you saw the movie, I think there's a valid argument to be made that the movie is actually not even about the help. It's actually about Skeeter, right? As played by Emma Stone. And my argument would be that she is the most complicated and developed character arc out of all the characters, right? I mean, think about how at the very beginning, she graduates, faces an all-white male-dominated world, is able to negotiate with the editor of the newspaper for her own column, and then she uses or leverages Viola Davis or Abelin's expertise for her advice column, and then gets the snappy idea to write a book, and then uses or leverages the stories of all these African-American women, right, to then land this book contract, finish the project, and then leave Mississippi for New York. And in the meantime, she reconciles with her boyfriend, realizes her value, and more importantly, reconciles with her mother. I mean, that's a pretty complicated character, and she leaves at the end of the movie. So she starts off at A, ends up at B. In contrast, all I can tell you is that if you saw the movie, Viola Davis and Octavia Spencer start the movie in maid outfits and end the movie in maid outfits. Even Viola Davis tells us that I may be an author one day. we didn't see evidence and manifestation of that on screen, while we absolutely saw tangible manifestation of Skeeter becoming an author, right? Two differences. And what's so fascinating is this, is that I thought about how you know, a Disney movie came out just a couple years ago entitled Soul. And I thought what was fascinating was the premise of the movie was Jamie Foxx's character dies and becomes disembodied and essentially gets inhabited by Tina Fey's character. And then Jamie Foxx is on a quest to try to get his body back, right? When you talk about who the movie is about. So when you look at the poster, the poster looks like the movie is about Jamie Foxx's character. Okay, this is my point, right? Who's the movie about, right? Like who is Hidden Figures about? Who is The Help about? Who is the movie Soul about? So it's presumptively about Jamie Foxx's character, the black male you see on the screen. But in actuality, because Jamie Foxx dies early in the movie, it is Tina Fey that actually occupies his body for most of the movie, and he actually occupies the body of the cat. And then when we do see him in the spiritual form, I think what's also fascinating, and you have to forgive me if I'm a little bit sensitive, as I am African-American male, but I think what's fascinating when you look down at the bottom and look at his blue spiritual form, notice what's absent. Even though you have the hat and glasses to distinguish, this connection of this is the same character, notice what's missing in terms of the nose and the lips. Two features that typically would identify someone as African-American and as, well, I don't know if you know, but I can tell you personally, have been the subject of ridicule and derision, right? People have teased me over the size of my lips, but that was before Kylie Jenner started doing injections, and right, that was before. So Kylie Jenner wasn't around when I was in high school. It's a shame and a pity, otherwise I would have made a killing as well. So I think what's so fascinating is the concept of a black body being disembodied, even though presumptively the movie is about Jamie Foxx's character, I think is absolutely fascinating, right? Because in so many ways, when we're going to the theater, we have to ask ourselves, what's the quality of the representation of the non-white characters that we're seeing on screen, whether it be African-American or anybody else. I mean, think about Killers of the Flower Moon, another Academy Award nominated movie. We're talking about Lily Gladstone being nominated, but we're talking about in a movie in which virtually all Native Americans are being killed off, right? And you talk about the quality of the role. And, did they have any agency? Were they able to stop it? Did they, figure out the mystery and overturn the conspiracy and make people go to jail? I mean, again, I'll let you watch the movie to determine. But in the 3.5 hours, I don't know if there was a lot of agency, right? By the Native American actors that did appear when we talk about who is the movie about. Okay. And finally, I just think that even though this was a Disney movie that was sold, it didn't do that well in the theaters for whatever reason. I just think how it's so ironic how a few years earlier, this was the subject of a horror movie called Get Out, right? This idea that I'm going to be disembodied. Okay. So what we're going to do is move on to Act 3, because I'm going to get to those Oscar angles before taking a couple questions. So when we ask ourselves, so what? Here on your screen, at the time of print, when the book came out 2 years ago, at the time of print, there were a total of 19 Academy Award winners, right? That number has increased to 21 now. Again, Daniel Kaluuya, Judas and the Black Messiah, is now added to that mix. And when we look at who is actually nominated, now in the numbers, I think the numbers in so many ways speak for themselves. So again, at the time that the book was written, and you can see the patterns that are establishing in terms of the number of Black actors that have been nominated for the most high profile roles, right? As far as Best Actor, Best Actress, right? Best Supporting Actress, Best Supporting Actor, also have small numbers as well over the years. And in terms of wins, I think what's so very fascinating is when you look at that Best Actress category, Halle Berry has been it, like, and forever in the whole history of the Academy. It's just Halle Berry. And mind you, quality. If you saw the movie Monsters Ball, for which she won an Oscar, my question to you is, did she win for a romantic scene a la Titanic, right? Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio? Was that romantic? Or did she win an Academy Award for a role that in many ways might underscore this idea that Black female bodies are simply not as valuable or not treated as with as much dignity and respect? And so this is what brings me to the Oscar Ingalls analysis, right? Because I think what's fascinating is when we look at, I'm going to put the statistics on the board. When we look at the numbers, virtually a fifth of all Black Academy Award nominations were Black, but not American, right? So when we talk about Daniel Kaluuya, I'm not taking anything away from him. I support the fact that he won an Academy Award. It's a stellar achievement. I'm just saying that he wasn't born in America, okay? And so, why does that matter? Well, it's all just the same. Well, no, not necessarily. The African-American experience is distinct from the experience of someone who is Black, but born somewhere else. It's distinct. And I think for me, it's not, again, I'm not taking away anything from him. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to add to the complexity of the African-American experience. Yes, at 2 a.m. in the morning, we're both Black and we both might get passed by a cab, okay? But the nuances are distinct, right? I mean, just like, I can't paint with the broad brush and say all Scandinavia is the same. The Norwegians will tell me that they do things differently than in Denmark. And in Denmark, they'll tell me they do things different in Finland. I just went to all the countries a couple of years ago. I mean, they have their own flags. It's distinct. They're in the same region. There's a lot of similarities, but it's distinct. And I just think it's fascinating that when you look at, say, Harriet, where Cynthia Erivo was nominated for Harriet, which is short for Harriet Tubman. I just find it fascinating that Harriet Tubman is distinctly an American heroine, right? I mean, she's crossing the border of the United States to Canada, right, multiple times, saving African Americans from enslavement. And again, I'm not taking anything away from Cynthia. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm asking Hollywood is, you mean to tell me walking the streets of Los Angeles, there's not an African American actress who's willing and able to play this role, right? Just in terms of the opportunities that Hollywood provides African Americans. Crossover refers back to what I was saying earlier about Janelle Monáe. So over a third of all Academy Award African American nominees were not classically trained, meaning that they were a comedian or they were a music star, and they were simply placed in these roles. And again, I'm not taking anything away from them. They're talented people, but at the same time, to what degree, when you talk about like Tom Cruise didn't jump out of the womb as an A-list actor, okay? Yes, he jumped on Oprah Winfrey's couch. We all know this, but he didn't jump out of the womb as an A-list actor. He was cultivated over a series of projects over a series of time. But again, here's the shorthand. Let's just put a blackface in that's very, very, very famous, and then hopefully we'll recover our investment. Deja vu refers to the idea that we've seen these people before. So when you look at, say, Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, and Viola Davis, let's just pray to God that this weekend, all three of them are not in a car accident in the same Uber, okay, on their way to the awards. Because if the three of them are in a car accident, we're going to lose virtually half of all Black Academy Award nominations over the whole 94-year history, okay, not 90-plus year history, okay. So Denzel himself has had 9 Academy Award nominations himself, right, over the years. And so in other words, again, my issue is with Hollywood. To what degree is Hollywood consistent in creating opportunities for new up-and-coming actors, right? Gravity of reality, Okay, so we're talking about 4 out of 5 times. Anytime you see an African American in an Academy nominated role, they're dealing with their character. Their character is dealing with is playing a character. Their character is playing a role that is dealing with, in some way, shape, or form, with issues of poverty and racism, racism and poverty, or poverty and racism. Okay, and look at these year's nominees: American Fiction, that's dealing with racism; Rustin, that's dealing with racism, right? So already that pattern is holding shape, right? And again, my beef is with Hollywood in terms of to what degree are we being conscious and creative about additional roles, other than us only having to stick to the script of keeping it real with poverty and racism, right? That's the only time you understand African Americans is through this aspect of the experience, which is true, but not always true, not all the time, not for everybody. Okay. And then lastly, still in the struggle, I thought was fascinating is that nearly a quarter of all Academy Award nominated roles were played by were played by played by actors whose roles did not survive the end of the movie. That's a long way to say that these characters die before the end of the movie, right? So it's just interesting, right? We look at the analysis. So again, when you look at this year, we have a total of 7 out of 20, which is a high number, right? So this is awesome. So in terms of from a quantity standpoint, we definitely have more diversity when it comes to people of color in these high profile positions, right? And again, I may mention a Lily Gladstone on the right-hand side at the upper right-hand corner for Colors of the Flower Moon, but unfortunately, she doesn't make it, right? Okay, and again, spoiler alert. And then America Ferrera is in Barbie. Okay, but we all know who the center of our attention is in Barbie. And if you missed it or haven't guessed, it's blonde white female played by Margot Robbie. Because again, the original Barbie was blonde white and female. Now, although they leaned into it with several of their jokes and satire, the bottom line is blonde white female Barbie is a star. Okay. Now going back to the Black Academy Award nominations, you have Kamingo. I may have butchered the brother's name. It's forgive me. In Rustin, in the upper left-hand corner, you have Jeffrey Wright for American Fiction. You also have Best Supporting, so they're both for Best Actor nominations. And then you have in the middle, and again, this brother is from This Is Us. You've seen him before. Also, he's in Wakanda Forever. He was nominated as well for Best Supporting Actor. And then at the bottom, you have individuals who were nominated for Best Supporting Actress as well. And again, going back to the 80% rule, you have on the left the sister who's nominated for The Color Purple. Okay, right? I mean, even though it's a musical, we're still dealing with racism and poverty. And then on the right-hand side, I think what's interesting is maybe not so much racism and poverty, but there's another pattern at play. If you saw The Holdovers, this name in the movie that Divine Sister Divine is in, with Paul Giamatti, he's nominated for Best Actor. The Holdovers is about employees who stay at a high-priced boarding school to monitor students who were unable to go home for break. So, what she does in the movie? She is in charge of culinary services. Yes, in other words, you have a heavy-set Black woman who's in charge of cooking, right, and providing these type of nurturing services. Which again, I mean, even though she's not wrapped up in a headscarf like Mammy of old, it's still very reminiscent. This idea that she plays she's not a professor, right? She's not an administrator, right? But she plays this subjugated position where her role is to cook, right? And I think what's interesting along those lines is to look at how that plays out with respect to the actual trailer. I don't know if anyone has seen the actual trailer, but I think that this was fascinating to see that aspect of her caretaking being mentioned.
Well, I look forward to your fine cooking.
Oh, no, don't do that. All we've got is whatever's in that walk-in.
So again, I look forward to your fine cooking, right? I look forward to your fine cooking. Okay. All right. So in terms of bringing this home here, because I would love to take some questions. The question is, what does this analysis leave us with, right? So in 1939, we start with Hattie McDaniel, who clearly was in a subjugated position. I mean, remember, mind you, her character's name was Mammy, not Mildred, the Mammy, or not just Martha. And you just see on screen, just by her behavior and her actions and what she says, that she's a postal employee. I mean, you're able to deduce that she's a doctor. No, her name is Mammy. I mean, she's depersonalized. Your function is to take care of everything around us. Okay. Right. And so years later, we still have this idea of glamorizing African-American women in the public spotlight, but only if they're in a subjugated position. Again, my beef with this movie, The Help, is that Minnie's character arc, pardon expression, pales in comparison to that of Skeeter. And again, I would love to take questions. I mean, maybe you all might have different opinion. Maybe you all saw something I didn't see, but her character arc pales in comparison, right? What did Minnie do to actually change her situation or change her scenario? How does she really grow, right? And so I think in many ways, The Help really isn't even about her, right? And so where does that leave us? I think where that leaves us is in a position where we have an opportunity to simply take a closer look at what we're looking at, right? Or to watch what we're watching. Because I think that when we talk about progress, I mean, everything is relative. I think at that time, in 1939, when people in the Academy Awards stood up and gave Hattie McDaniel a standing ovation, those people in their right minds thought that this was so progressive, right? I mean, we're standing up, we're applauding. She actually won an Oscar. This is the first non-white person to do so. That is awesome. That is amazing. But again, hindsight is 2020. And what I'm challenging us to think about is, why do we have to wait till the year 2073 to appreciate what is happening now? Why can't we ask questions critically in the moment now? Because when we look back at 1939, we realize that she was seated in the back by the kitchen. David Selznick had to advocate for her to even be included in the room at all because it was a segregated space, right? And the idea that I give you polite applause for serving a maid on screen is not necessarily revolutionary some 60 years after the era of enslavement ended, right? And not when she was also typecast for the rest of her career. I mean, that was the only way people understood her, was in a subjugated position. Many of you may be familiar with the radio program Beulah. So what I'm challenging us to think about is, in what ways can we still question the quality of the roles that we see, right? And can we imagine a future where we can utilize our creative juices to come up with substantive, meaningful scripts and ideas that truly do incorporate the humanity and dignity of all people involved on screen? Because the last thing I'll leave you with, for hopefully taking a couple of questions, is that when I look at a movie like Jurassic World, I think what's so fascinating is how when you look at that ball in the middle of the screen, that ball is not real, right? I mean, so in other words, many people had to use their imagination to create the scene and see the scene. But this is the reality, right? This is the reality. So people had to see past this in order to create a memorable moment that many of us enjoy. And I think that for many of us, when it comes to race, many of us have maybe not been challenged to think of race in new ways, right? My hope is that this talk, this analysis, the Oscar angles will help promote and prompt, some of this thinking of, how do I see past what's right in front of me so I can imagine something different? And with that, ladies and gentlemen, your training day is complete. And allow me to state in closing that one place where we are all equal is at the box office. Hollywood will take our money all just the same. But it still appears to me that even though we all pay the same price of admission, it is people of color and African Americans in particular that disproportionately bear the cost of omission. I simply want to encourage you to keep watching what you're watching, keep thinking critically, and do keep an open eye for racism 2.0 and anything else that might still remain hidden in plain sight. Thank you.
Excellent presentation. Thank you so much for that. We do have time for a couple questions. The first one that came in, you kind of touched on this at the end, but I'm going to ask it and maybe we can explore a little bit further. A while back, Gone with the Wind was removed from streaming services for its racist portrayal of Black people. However, this also removed the first non-white Oscar performance. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, my position would be not to necessarily remove it entirely, right? Because I think that's a conversation, and I know it's not our subject, that has been bubbling up when you talk about Confederate statues, right? Do you keep them up or do you remove them? I've always been an advocate for this idea of contextualizing because it really did happen in time, right? It really did happen in time. And so I'm not advocating that all movie film schools stop showing Birth of a Nation or The Jazz Singer, because many of them do show the movie and teach off of them because from a technical standpoint and their historical significance. What I'm advocating for is additional context. Let's not be lazy and just say, well, I hope that people understand it. No, especially today, with social media, what's so fascinating is even though we have all this information at our fingertips, I find that people are actually less resourceful. And I'm just speaking about my students, right? And I'll constantly make references and I'll ask them questions, and they just simply don't know. The conversation with the parents, the generational transfer of information is not as consistent. And so I think we just simply just can't take things for granted. I think additional context to understand why this movie was made, what was happening when this movie was made, why this appealed to the imagination of so many, and to help explain why people even today dress up on an annual basis and will go to theaters in the South to watch Gone with the Wind in theaters. It still happens. Gone with the Wind, even though it may have been taken from some places, not been taken down everywhere. I know it was on a flight that I had, an international flight I had a couple of years ago on Delta, right? And so the idea is that it has its significance, and I think for us to understand it, will put us in a better position moving forward, right? So my whole position is not to erase the history, but to embrace it and allow the dark, embarrassing chapters shine a light on the path moving forward.
Excellent, thank you. I agree. Context is everything. Next question, do you think movements like the hashtag Oscars So White or instances like Octavia Butler saying she regretted her role in The Help make a difference, or is it all on our box office dollar vote?
Whoa, I think that person has been to LA before. It might be the latter. That money talks. It really does. And because I think what's so very fascinating, right? Yeah, everyone talks about the hashtag Oscars So White, seminal movement, right? That's great. But this very next year, there was only one non-white nomination. The very next year, after all this advocacy and all this, promotion and bad press, and and they put in a new African-American female, president, and they changed the rules to allow for more flexibility. They made all these steps. They said all the right things. But then you can't still influence the minds of people. You can't control people. The voters just came up with what they came up with. Or you can say it's a function of the system in terms of which projects are being greenlit. I think all these factors, play into, come into play. But the bottom line is the very next year, there's only one non-white, nomination. That actually, ironically, was for Cynthia Erivo and Harriet, right? Which we kind of touched upon. So, I think that when we talk about the history, it's a matter of just keeping it more in front of us. Going back to that other question with Gone with the Wind, I think Disney has a similar dilemma. When they moved to Disney Plus with their online system, they decided to not take certain items out of the vault, such as Song of the South. I don't know if anyone knows the song, Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-day, my, oh my, what a wonderful day. Well, that actually comes from Song of the South, plenty of sunshine headed my way. But the context is he was actually an enslaved individual on a plantation. And he was creating these stories about Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby as a way to help the white children on the plantation who were upset about the parents getting a divorce, right? And so I think when we talk about, oh, well, we're just going to change Song of the South to the Princess and the Frog. This is awesome. Tiana is now going to be present and accounted for. I think that is awesome. But again, the context is also important as well. It's important to know that a ride wasn't specifically created for her, but it was kind of in the aftermath of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all this national conversation. It was like, oh, okay, well, let's just replace one for the other, right? So it's a little convenient. I just want us to be mindful of the being truthful about the efforts we're making to perhaps change the cycles, right? And I think understanding, the history fully will allow us to fully steer clear of some of the same missteps moving forward.
Excellent, thank you. All right, this is a good question to end on. Do you have any recommendations for movies to watch this weekend?
Okay. Well, so for example, when you talk about movies to watch this weekend, I do think it's worth checking out Killers of the Flower Moon, because I think while it in some ways is stylized through Hollywood, and unfortunately the Native Americans don't necessarily win at the end, I still think what it speaks to the power of movies to transport you to a time and space, right? And have you think and appreciate, because it's based loosely upon some true events. I mean, we do know that when you start off with the land acknowledgement, that is us saying that, well, we weren't the first ones here. And that relationship is kind of complicated. We don't talk about it all the time, do we? And so I think going to a movie like that, even though it still focuses on Leonardo DiCaprio, that sort of deal, still I think prompts people just to think about, what it might have been like back then, and then what am I doing now in the here and now? I'm a bit nervous about movies like American Fiction, because with satire, it's hard to control what people go into the theater with. So I'm sure to Jeffrey Wright and all of his friends, they all get it because maybe they have shared same experiences, etc. But I mean, if I'm coming from Idaho and I honestly just don't have that many African Americans that live in my neighborhood or go to my church, I'm not a bad person. I mean, I'm just limited in terms of my exposure. I might watch a movie like that and it might be a little confused by it or may not get all the jokes. If anything, it might actually underscore some of the problematic narratives that I already had lurking in my head to begin with. So I'm a little more skittish of those. The Rustins of the world for me are good movies, but let's just be honest. On a Friday night, I've been black all week long, right? Fighting the good fight. I'm trying to relax. I want to see some dinosaurs in outer space. You see what I'm saying? So, that's not what I'm just trying to do. But I will say this though. Do check out Dune. It is Academy Award nominated. And I think if you like movies, you want to go see a movie like Dune. I mean, I think for many of us who grew up watching the original Star Wars trilogy before they had computer graphics, when they really had the labor to put together, their special effects and be thoughtful, this movie, I think, is moving in that direction when you just think about, wow, this really could be another world. Now, again, spoiler alert, you have to watch the movie, see what happens with Zendaya. And hopefully there's a third movie that she'll get her comeuppance again. But in terms of movies, I think they're so very powerful and they have this ability to transport our imaginations. What I'm advocating for is not just necessarily physically. It's not about me being in the back of the bus now anymore, Amanda, but psychologically, right? When we all sit down in a theater, are we all liberated by what I call the freedom of fantasy? Or are some of us grounded by the gravity of reality?
Excellent way to end. Thank you so much for that presentation. Thank you to the Johnson County Library staff who helped make this program possible, and thank you all for attending. If you would like to see more of Dr. G, please join us on Thursday, March 7th for a Meet the Authors panel with Dr. Gooding, Dr. Sylvia Ann Greensword, and Mr. Marcellus Perkins about their book, A History to Remember, TCU in Purple, White, and Black. And there's also a writing workshop on Saturday, March 9th, titled How to Rightly Write About Race When Afraid to Say the Wrong Thing. And you can register for both of these programs on Johnson County Library's website. So the Past Is Prologue program will be taking a hiatus for the summer months, but please watch our website for our return date this fall. And thank you all so much for attending, and we'll see you at our next program.